The call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's tax cuts provide cost of living relief for Middle Australia, and what are the alternatives?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the terrific member for Gilmore for her question. 64,000 taxpayers in Gilmore will get a tax cut. 87% of them will get a bigger tax cut than before. Mr Speaker, the last couple of weeks make two things really clear. From this Prime Minister, Middle Australia gets a bigger tax cut. From that opposition leader, all they get is the usual slapstick negativity, Mr Speaker. Our tax cuts are all about providing more relief for more people to help with the cost of living. Every taxpayer gets a tax cut, 84% of them get a bigger tax cut. 90% of tax-paying women, 90% of taxpayers under 35, 90% of taxpayers in the regions will all get a bigger tax cut, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposites spent the best part of a couple of weeks lurching and searching for an excuse to dud those workers. They called for an election. They equated bigger tax cuts with Marxism. They said they'd fight us every step of the way, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition wanted to boycott Woolies, and then he wanted to boycott Middle Australia as well. But after all their posturing and all their politicking and puffing themselves up goes the little white flag, Mr Speaker. Up went the white flag. If they really believe the changes we are making are wrong, they'd vote against them and they'd roll them back, as the Deputy Leader said they would. Instead, to justify this humiliating capitulation, they say they're going to resurrect the old Stage 3 tax cuts. The best they can come up with in 2024 is to try and breathe life into the member for Cook's tax policy from 5 years ago. And, Mr Speaker, there is a theme here. Last week, the Shadow Treasurer accused me of having no plan to take this country back to what it was like during the Morrison government. I want to make it clear to the House that I took this as a compliment, Mr Speaker, because when the rest of Australia watches that Nemesis documentary on the ABC, they see a cautionary tale. But when the member for Hume settles down in his PJs with a little hot chockey and an old back and black mug to watch that documentary, he sees some kind of golden era, Mr Speaker.
Order. Members on my members on my right. The member for Spence will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting immediately, so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Treasurer is a serial offender and he's at it again. He ought to desist in the grubby personal attacks and stick to the question.
The Treasurer will cease interjecting, and I'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I'm trying to deal with the Manager's point of order. The Leader of the House on the point of order.
Yeah, on the point of order, in terms of language that's allowed to be used in answers to questions, the precedents are clear. I did a search of the previous government. The word thug was used 15 times in question time by one particular minister who's now Leader of the Opposition. These comments are clearly in order.
Resume your seat. No, I'll deal with this order. I'll deal with this matter. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Treasurer will resume his seat. The Minister for Home Affairs has been continually interjecting during question time. She is warned. If she interjects one more time, she will not be here in the chamber. Order. The Treasurer was asked about alternatives, not alternative personalities or people. So I'm going to ask him to return back to the question, and he can refer to alternative policies, not alternative personalities. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The alternative on their watch was higher inflation in a quarterly sense, wages were lower, and waste and rorts were feeding huge deficits in the budget. And the tax cuts were skewed to people already on the highest incomes. And the point I'm making, Mr Speaker, is that they haven't learned and they haven't changed. If anything, they're more divided and more divisive than they've ever been. And that's why I say to the people of Australia watching that documentary on the ABC, if you thought the Abbott and Turnbull and Morrison governments in the Nemesis doco were bad, we now know from this tax debacle on that side of the House that the dregs of those governments are even worse.